Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Let's go exploring Patagonia through Darwin's eyes, presented by NatHab's Guide Development Director and Expedition Leader Annie Van Dinther and Expedition Leader Lilia Gonzalez. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today. Annie, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Kendall. Appreciate all the hard work of putting this together. And thank you to all of you who've signed on today. We have a very interesting topic and something that's going to extend into next week as well, because next week, Thursday, we will also be talking about Patagonia. But for today, I would like to welcome Lilia. She's going to help us get some great insight into Charles Darwin and how he came up with some of his most famous theories. I'm coming to you from Homer, Alaska, and Lilia, you are coming from a very different part of the world. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Annie, for having me today. And thank you, everybody, for making the time to be here. So I'm now in Puebla, in the central part of Mexico. I'm a biologist, so since I was very little, I know that nature was my passion. But back in 2013, more or less, I had the opportunity to make an internship in Tierra del Fuego. And I stood there for 3 years. So it also became one of my favorite places where I discovered many things. One among them is the, other part of the story of Charles Darwin.
All right. So now you spent some time living in this area, and you actually know firsthand what this beautiful place is like. Tell us a little bit about exactly where we're going to be focusing in on today and learning about, because Patagonia is a big place, right?
Yes, as you can see, it's a huge extension. We are talking about 4,100 square miles more. So as you can see, well, that's a current map of the place. It's highlighted all the Patagonia area. So as you can see, it's more on the side of Argentina more than Chile, but it's split in two countries. So it's quite interesting, the geography in that part. But the part that is highlighted on the blue square, that belongs to Tierra del Fuego, that it's considered as an extension of the Patagonia. And we are going to be also, well, kind of visiting Cape Horn, that is a very well-known archipelago, very famous. So we are going to be visiting that area today.
And so today we're going to talk about a couple different expeditions that went to this area, and especially one that had Charles Darwin on it. And I just want to say from the beginning that we are talking about several hundred years ago, and perceptions of people from that time. And we're going to learn about how those perceptions changed. So let's learn first. Tell us how Patagonia got its name.
Well, the name of Patagonia, we have to go back in time pretty much to 1520 when Magellan was there. And he started using the word of Patagon to refer to the indigenous people that was there, living there. They were very tall people. We are talking about 6 feet, 6 feet and a half. If you compare with the rest of the Americas native people or indigenous people that were around 5 feet, 5 feet and a half. So it was a big difference in sizes. And the people that were living in that area, they were wearing these leather sandals made of guanaco skin. Guanaco is a kind of llama. So every time they were walking, the prints that they left on the sand look much bigger than the real size of their feet. So that's why the name of Patagon, it's also play a little bit with a Spanish word that it's patón, big feet. So it's one of the most accepted theories about the origin of that word.
That's so interesting. So essentially there was a perception of the people because of large sandals they were wearing. Do I have that right?
Yes, pretty much. That they were giants, basically.
So we could have named this place Tiva or Chaco if we were going with some brands from today, but we're talking about really a group of people who, according to those first explorers, seemed to be exceptionally large, and that's where we get this name from. Now, let's learn a little bit about moving a few hundred years forward here, the first expedition to Patagonia. Tell us about this.
Well, the first expedition to Patagonia from the United Kingdom, it began in 1826. There were some previous expeditions from other countries like Spain or Portugal, but this one was the first one from the United Kingdom. So in this first voyage of the Beagle, and as you can see, the HMS Beagle and the HMS Adventure, HMS means His Majesty's ship. In this first expedition, Darwin wasn't there. Darwin is going to be in the second one. As you can see that, and he was basically in Tierra del Fuego only 2 years. So in this expedition, we are going to talk about Fitzroy, that it was also the captain of the HMS Beagle in the first expedition, and he realizes in that expedition that he needed a naturalist to describe better the things that he was seeing in that place. So that's why we are going to be talking a little bit about the first expedition.
So on this first expedition, they don't have Charles Darwin, and they head to Patagonia, and they discover not necessarily the most hospitable environment in terms of weather. I've been to this area, and yeah, it is not exactly a Caribbean beach, shall we say. So tell us a little bit about what they were encountering when they got there on this first expedition.
Well, imagine that picture is from the Beagle Strait, the Beagle Channel, sorry, and that was the first expedition in that place ever. So the Beagle Channel was discovered during the first expedition with Fitzroy, and when they see this kind of place with very rough waters, very big waves, incredible wind speeds, so of course it's very difficult to be maneuvering those kind of ships without an engine. They do not have reliable charts, so of course it was a very hard place to be exploring. Basically, even nowadays with the charts and engines and a lot of technology, sometimes it's hard imagining those days.
When I was on one of our expeditions to Antarctica, we were sailing back from the Antarctic Peninsula to Ushuaia, so coming through this area, and they actually closed the Beagle Channel because of weather. So I can personally attest to it sometimes being a difficult place. Now, when they went on this first expedition, they did encounter people in Tierra del Fuego, and there are different groups of indigenous people. Tell us a little bit about these different groups.
Well, the different groups in that area, it's divided pretty much in two big groups. First, you have the ones that are in mainland, that is at the last part of the continent, and then the other ones that were inhabiting the big island of Tierra del Fuego. You can see it in light green. So the purple ones and the two green groups, those were pedestrians, and they were very close related between them. And the second group are the canoers, the groups that are in dark and light blue. So those ones, as you can see, they have different places that they were living on, but one of the most important places is Cape Horn. As you can see, the last tip down there, that's Cape Horn. So it's incredible how these people survive to that place in particular, being a canoer with all the different things that we have been mentioning about this place, right?
So when Fitzroy got to this area and he met the people of this area, there's a story of what happened. And it wasn't necessarily positive. So tell us a little bit about this story.
Well, when he was sailing the west and south part of the Strait of Magellan, he sent some of the crew members to an island to collect some data. And one of the boats, actually the best whaling boat that they had on the Beagle, was stolen by the indigenous people. So he was so mad that he started a chase of 3 weeks of trying to find the responsible ones. So in those moments, he was so mad that probably he started taking hostages. Groups of indigenous people, sometimes 11, sometimes less. Then he released some of them. The thing is that he decided to keep, in the first place, that little girl. Her name is, well, they named her Fuegia Basket. She was around 8, 9 years old. And he realized that having a little girl on board, it was bringing happiness to the crew. So she was a very smiling and nice girl. So he decided to keep her. And during the following days, he decided to start having more indigenous people on board. So the second one was York Minster, the name because he captured him on a nearby island with that name. Then boat memory, as you can see, there is no sketch of him because, well, he survived. But it was with Fitzroy at the beginning, and all these 3 indigenous people belong to the Alakaluf canoers tribe. And then you have Jemmy Bottom, the last but not the least. He is going to play a very important role that we are going to describe later. But he belonged to the Yamana or Jagan people.
Okay, so Fitzroy realizes that it would be advantageous to have first people from this area join them on their expedition. I'm sorry, but as a mom, I cannot imagine my 8 or 9-year-old daughter being taken and brought onto some ship. I understand in the case of Button, he even got his name because of a trade for a button.
Yeah, he was traded by a pearl button that Fitzroy gave to his family. So of course, all this probably was a big misunderstanding because of course the family, I'm sure that that wasn't his intention to trade his son for a pearl button, right? Probably they thought that he was going to the ship, go around a couple of hours and then coming back. But the thing is that Fitzroy saw the advantage of having these people teach them English and bring them back to that land to establish a mission, to establish a very reliable source of information about the rest of the explorers that were in that area, trying also to establish their kingdoms there, right?
So it's the first steps of colonization, really, right? To have some people come. So we're talking about, this is some of the first drawings of what the encounters would have been like with the first people. They were used to rugged lands. They were used to extreme conditions. And they go on this boat with Fitzroy on the HMS Beagle, and they end up in London.
Yes, suddenly after a few months, they arrived to London. So imagine how shocking could it be to this huge change. Basically, when we are traveling, we are used to have all the information ahead. Of course, we have internet, we have all those tools to find out where we are going, the kind of gear that we are going to use. But basically, these guys, they were to that land knowing pretty much nothing about what was happening and what was the intention to have them there. But Fitzroy take very good care of them. He was even worried about his education, how they were vaccinated. Sadly, both Memory died 3 weeks after they arrived to England. But the other 3 were very, very famous around the society of England back in those days. and even the queen and the king met them and give them a lot of presents. So of course the people was paying attention to that fact, that having that people there, it is going to be quite useful.
And so at this point, we start to move towards this second expedition. Fitzroy realizes he needs a naturalist, and Charles Darwin joins the party. And on this expedition, 2 or 3 of these indigenous people, Button, for example, are also now 3 people coming back onto this second expedition and hopefully heading for home, correct?
Correct, that's true. Fitzroy was very worried about these people that he took from home. So he wanted to go back and release them, even when we cannot talk about slavery like that, but of course probably they didn't even know what was happening. So as they were learning English, the communication of course get better with them. So when Darwin met these people, he started to actually have conversation and to have a link and a relationship with them, mainly with Jemmy Bottom. But that sketch of Darwin, for example, that paint, it's when he was on his 31. So when he left and joined that expedition, he was 22 years old, and Fitzroy was 26. So we are talking about very young people that were taking also those very important decisions. So when you are very young and you have preconceptions of how to think about pretty much everything. I mean, he was a very well-educated guy. He went to Cambridge. He studied part of medicine. He had some med studies and he quit. So many things that have been shaping his mind, his way of thinking. And suddenly he was in front of these indigenous people that belonged to a very far away land. Of course, he had some thoughts that probably changed during the time.
Right. I mean, he was looking to this new land with the lens of English society at the time, right? Now, when
Victorian society.
Right, Victorian society. And so when most of us think about this expedition, we think about one place, the Galapagos.
Yes, exactly.
And yes, and we, go ahead.
No, please keep going.
We think about Galapagos, we think about, this is where Darwin is building his ideas of natural selection, of adaptation. We're thinking about the finches, and Darwin is starting to build this theory that he has about evolution. And the Galapagos is a pretty desolate place in and of itself, but it is filled with incredible animals, some of which were just used for food. I mean, we like to think of Lonesome George and of course the tortoises of the Galapagos, but at that time, whalers were known to stop by the Galapagos to pick up tortoise so that they could have fresh food on their boat. All of this is what Darwin is experiencing as a young man, and especially the finches really started to give him a notion in regards to animals about natural selection. But he was not just in the Galapagos. This was quite the journey. Tell us a little bit about this whole expedition.
Well, the whole expedition, or the idea of this whole expedition, it was to circumnavigate the globe. So as you can see in that map, they touched land in many different places, and he had contact with many different indigenous people from around the world. So of course he had an opinion of each one of the places that he visited. Also, Darwin was a very good geologist. So his descriptions of the different places that they visited are quite profound and very deep in details. So that's why it's so complicated to try to think all the different achievements of this expedition, because there were so many that it's very difficult to focus only in some of them. But that's the thing that I'm trying to do now, even when it's quite difficult. We are going to be talking about the other archipelago that is quite interesting, that it's Cape Horn.
And that is Cape Horn, exactly. And this is an area where, if we sort of think of Darwin building some of his ideas about natural selection based on the finches of the Galapagos, it was his interaction with Jimmy Button, and the people that did travel to England that started to build his ideas of adaptation, evolution with humans.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Even when his first encounters with these indigenous people of Patagonia and Cape Horn mainly, he had an opinion. Of course, it's quite shocking to see these people naked with that weather, right? It's very difficult to imagine how they can survive only eating seashells, for example. So he had some troubles trying to find out how these people were surviving to those conditions. So after a few years, he started to untangle all the thing, and eventually became to his theory of human evolution. So of course you have, for example, that image. It's from a Jagan family. The Jagans, the structure of their society is family. So that's why talk about tribes is not very precise, because if you name a tribe, it's like you have a chief and then the people that it's following his commands, right? But in this case, the society, it was that family. It was father, mother, the kids in the middle of the canoe, and of course they have some friends and family around, but they do not get along to all of them. So even when you are talking about the same group, there were some differences between them.
And this group, remember back to that inhospitable area. We are talking about people who are living in very cold weather, who are surviving in what we would consider to be difficult conditions. I mean, if we were to be there today, we would want to have Gore-Tex and backpacks and all kinds of different technology to help us be comfortable in that environment. They had technology as well, but it's not what we would necessarily think of.
Yeah, it's difficult to imagine that people like that in that area, they have technology. They use the resources that they have around to survive. For example, they have Gore-Tex in a way, because they use the fat of the whales or the seals around and try to protect their skin. So that way they can say goodbye to humidity and try to be dry for a longer time. Of course, they were also isolated from cold weather. So all that makes them survive and adapt to that environment for more than 7,000 years. So wow, it's a very long period of adaptation to that environment. But imagine that suddenly starts to change because you have the whalers in there, and you have people taking all the seals. So of course, things start to change in that moment.
And this is where Darwin starts to realize that his first idea, where he used words like savages, and he used words where he would even compare the first people to animals. But as he starts to experience their incredible wisdom and their way of being able to survive in that area, he realizes that his first ideas were not correct about the people that were living in Tierra del Fuego.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that it took a little bit of time to him to notice. I used to say that he took some time meditating on his own ideas. And he realized, as I was mentioning before, that when he wrote those ideas, he was in his 20s. So of course his mind changed during the time, and realized that he was totally wrong, that they were very well adapted to that environment. They have all the tools that they need. They have all the food that they need. So if you want to see it in a different way, they survive in a very sustainable way in that place.
And he even realized, I think one of the hugest sort of shifts in thinking for him must have been his encounter when he went back and Button was there now, living again the way that he was raised to live, not living as if he is someone who spent time in England. Tell us what happens at this point.
Well, when Fitzroy and Darwin take the Fuegians to their homes, the idea is it was also to establish an Anglican mission. So they had a missionary on board. His name was Matthews. So they tried to establish a mission in a place called Wulaya. Wulaya is in the Navarino Island. So they choose that place because they can make some crops, they can make some wigwams or the huts for they to live. So they leave Matthews and the Fuegia, York, and Jamie Button in that island, and they continue with their work. A few days later, they come back, and the other groups of Yamanas people, they destroy everything and stole many things from the mission. So of course, when Fitzroy arrived, he saved Matthews because probably he wasn't about to survive, and he asked to Jamie Bottom to go back if he wants, and he said no, that he preferred to stay in that place. And as you can see, he was now again with that with his original look, a little bit thinner, covered in blubber of a marine mammal, pretty much naked, and using the canoe again. So he preferred to go back to his origins than accepting going to England. So imagine how difficult it was for Darwin to accept that answer, you know? Who do not want a ticket to England nowadays, right? So for him, it was quite challenging to try to understand why he preferred to stay in that place with all those conditions. And the thing is that Jamie Bottom preferred to stay at home with his wife, with his family, eating the things that he knows to collect and wear.
You know, I don't mean to take this too lightly, but sometimes I think about that here in Alaska, where people ask us, like, why don't you want to go live in a big city or in a place where all of the things that are easy to get, you know, life could be easier, basically. But this is where we choose to live. Of course, it's a very different situation here, but I do think this informed Darwin about starting to understand that the different people he was meeting along the way were not necessarily inferior, but rather highly adapted to the place that they were from and had been surviving for thousands and thousands of years before Darwin and the expedition comes along.
Yeah, of course. And now that you are comparing your home with this land, remember that it's pretty much the same latitude, but in a different hemisphere. So
yes, I was really struck by that when I was in Ushuaia. In order to go to Antarctica, I was really struck by thinking I'm at the same latitude. And if you know me at all, I love to sort of nerd out on latitudes and how ecosystems are similar or not in these different places. Yeah. So maybe we'll have to have a webinar on that sometime. So
yeah, that would be great.
It'd be fun, right? So this area that is, to Darwin's eyes, inhospitable, they do decide to set up a mission. And unfortunately, that did not go well for the people of Tierra del Fuego. And I think one of the most interesting things is this idea of clothing that we presume is going to be the best way to survive in this area, but it turns out it's not.
Yeah, and they believed that they were making good to these people, that they were taking good care of them, teaching their language. Actually, there was one missionary that wrote a huge dictionary with the Jagan language to English, and it's about 3,000 words. So it's a massive dictionary. So the thing is that when you start changing things that have been working for a long time in a very short time, these kind of things sometimes is a lot of pressure to those populations. So that was the thing that was happening here. People that were nomads, they were forced to be living in one place on the missions, sharing with a lot of people. Some of them probably they don't even get along each other because they weren't from their families. They have to be dressed all day long, and if you are in a place that it's raining all the time and you are very well dressed, of course you are going to have a lot of humidity in you. So they start to get sick. Their immune system start to be a little bit weaker. So there were a lot of different changes during those years that make them to be more vulnerable.
Yeah, I can't imagine dressing in cotton in a wet and cold environment. I mean, that's probably one of the first things in our pre-departure briefing for people who are coming to visit these areas is leave your cotton at home because it is the first way to get cold. So,
Exactly.
Tell us what ended up happening with these different indigenous people. Are they still there in Tierra del Fuego? I understand you actually had a personal experience that was quite special there.
Yeah, when I was in Harberton Ranch, this was one of the missions, the Anglican missions established in that area. I was with the descendants of the original missionary that arrived there. So I had the opportunity to meet Cristina Calderon. Cristina Calderon is the last lady, the last one of the Jagan people. So there is only one left from that tribe or that group that it was living from Cape Horn to the Beagle Channel. So of course it is shocking. It's of course an honor to meet her, but at the same time it's quite sad because you know that she's the only one that can speak that language, but she doesn't have someone to talk with. So it's quite sad, you know. And that was happens the same with some of the other groups. Each group has its different story. Some of them are bigger in numbers now, but they know that they are going to disappear in the following years, sadly. But that's true.
Wow. Well, it's really special for us that you are so knowledgeable on this and can share the story and let us know about this incredible group of people, different groups of people. We do have a few minutes left before the top of the hour, and I think it would be really cool if we could just share some of the differences between the mainland of Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego from an ecosystem perspective. So let's look a little bit closely at this map here. And the second expedition that went to Tierra del Fuego, tell us about this.
Well, they arrived to the Strait of Magellan, a little bit north. So when they were there, Darwin started noticing that area was pretty much a desert. We are talking about that place around Punta Arenas and Puerto Sara. So it was the northern shore of the Strait of Magellan. So when he visited that area, he started seeing that kind of landscape. As you can see, it's a big kind of desert, of course, beautiful, but it's kind of a desert with a lot of ice. They have their mountain ranges around, the ice fields. So the next one, please. Even when he had that kind of landscape, he was very, very surprised that he had a lot, well, he found a lot of different animals and different species that he probably, that if he saw that a hummingbird, for example, in Brazil, it's easy to think that it's a common species, right? But in that land, he was quite like, why we have a tropical species here in this desert, right? It was also his first time actually seeing an Andean condor. He described that species of rhea, the Darwin's rhea. It's like that ostrich that you have there. He saw pumas, so a lot of different species, and he was really, really surprised about the diversity, even when it was pretty much a desert.
And those weren't the only animals, right? There were even other animals that he saw.
Yes, he saw penguins, for example, and he was surprised because, as I was mentioning, the Darwin's rhea and the penguins, both of them are birds, but they do not use their wings to fly. They adapted to that area, so he started to think about evolution and adaptation. He saw also the guanacos. That's the kind of llama that I was mentioning at the beginning of the lecture. And in that part of the mainland, it looks like that. But if you go to Tierra del Fuego, they are going to look a little bit different.
And so the landscape looks very different to me. Tell us about this.
Well, now that we are going to go to mainland, I mean to the big island of Tierra del Fuego, if you compare the big deserts to that doesn't look like a desert, right? That looks more like a huge forest with a lot of trees. Even when they have just 3 or 4 species of trees, it's very impressive the amount of trees that you can have in that forest. And as you can see in the picture below on the right, the yellow thing that it's growing on the rocks is lichen. So even in those stones, you have life growing, and that is the beginning of the forest that you have in the other pictures. So of course it was quite impressive for him seeing all that life growing pretty much everywhere.
And there were different animals that lived in the Tierra del Fuego region than in the mainland. So they were even seeing a difference there. Tell us about these animals.
Yeah, the guanacos, as you can see them there, you have a beautiful family of guanacos. So when they are in Tierra del Fuego, they look fluffier. They have their fur, it's more dense. And even when you have the same species, they are adapted to a different ecosystem, right? You have, for example, in the first picture on the top of the right, you have pit in there. So pit is quite dangerous place, you know, because you have a lot of them in Alaska too. So having all these different landscapes that they weren't in mainland, but they are very vast in here. He started to notice how different were life in contrast, or if you compare both places.
And there was other animals that they did see there. Tell us about this.
Which ones?
We've got the penguins and we've got this food that was so important.
Sorry. I am delayed, so the pictures are a little bit late as we speak. So yeah, as I was mentioning, when he arrived, he was around the Strait of Magellan area. So when he went to the Beagle Channel, he started to find other species of penguins. As you can see in that picture, we have 2 other species that are subantarctic. We have the king penguin and we have the gentoo. So he started to see that he had even more species that back in mainland. So he was quite surprised. We have an oyster catcher in the last picture next to the ice fields. And one of the most important things that I wanted to mention in this slide is that orange thing that is hanging from that tree. That is a fungus, a very famous fungus in Tierra del Fuego, and the name is Indian bread. Why Indian bread? Well, because that was one of the main food sources for the Indians. Sometimes when they do not have anything to eat, that fungus, that thing, saved them from death. So the Latin name of that species of fungus is Citaria darwini.
Okay, there you go. And so it was absolutely instrumental for Darwin to be in that area and to learn about the animals, to learn about the people. He was forever changed based on his experience that he had with the people in the area of Tierra del Fuego. And for sure, that is what informs us today when we learn about the science of adaptation and evolution. Thank you so much, Lilia, for sharing this information with us. It's really a treasure. You have just so much knowledge on this subject matter, and it's incredible to learn from you. So I think at this point, we are ready for questions, Kendall, if there are any of them.
Yeah, well, we've got a quiet crowd today. I've just got one question for you so far. If anyone else has a question they'd like to submit, you can do that in your control panel under the questions field. Really amazing presentation today, Lilia. That was such a fascinating story. There's someone here who was just wondering if you could clarify a little bit of what you meant by saying that the native groups are disappearing. Do you mean because of acculturation or assimilation, or is there some other reason?
Yeah, well, them as originally were, with their traditions, all those traditions and the way of living back in those days in the 19th century is disappearing. And even when the descendants of those people are still alive, they do not live in the traditional way. So, of course, they mix already with Chileans or Argentinians in that area, but they are disappearing in that way, in that their languages are disappearing, their traditions, their celebrations. That's what I meant when I mentioned disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they survive in a way because we have seen them in this kind of lectures or books, but they are not pure race, if you want to say it like that.
Mm-hmm. So someone here was wondering how the native people could survive in that climate without any clothing. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. As I was mentioning, they had, before the whalers arrived to that area, they had a lot of populations of seals and sea lions and even whales. Finding a carcass of a whale back in those days, it was a big celebration because they are going to have blubber for a very long time. So when they had that source around, they used the blubber to protect their skin. So with that put in their skin, it was a kind of isolation of the weather, of the conditions outside. With that fat, we know how it works with in the marine mammals, that it's also an isolation for the cold weather or cold water. In this case, they were also protecting their own skins from that cold weather, and of course of all the wet environment that they were around. So if you are with that kind of Gore-Tex protection and you approach to the fire, you are going to dry easier than if you are wearing clothes that are not water resistant, if you want to say like that.
Mm-hmm.
Did they also use animal skins as clothing?
Yes, mainly the ones that were in mainland, like the Tehuelches or the Selknam people, also the Hauch. They had guanaco skins. They had seals, for example. But the thing is that if Darwin start to notice that they approach to the ships totally naked because they were hiding their finest leathers somewhere around. They hide them because probably they had a previous experience with whalers stealing their fur for them. So that's another theory, for example.
Mm-hmm. And along those lines, there was a question about you had mentioned that Westerners, Northerners, however you want to put it, when they came in, the missionaries, and they gave them cotton clothing to wear. Do you know if any of them ended up, the native people, if any of them ended up rejecting the cotton clothing and going back to what they used to wear?
Yeah, of course. Many of them, they were forced to try be living on the missions, but many of them escape. But the thing is that even when they escape from the missions, the main food source of them was gone. The whalers took too many seals, they took too many whales. So it was even harder now to survive in those conditions when they do not have the main food source.
Mm-hmm.
And Button himself would be the best example of someone who had total access to the clothing of the Europeans at the time and said, nope, this is not the way that I want to dress.
Mm-hmm.
That's not for me. Thank you.
You mentioned the dictionary earlier, and someone was wondering if there are any efforts to record or document or rescue any of the native languages.
Yeah, yes, actually there are some recordings made of it was Anne Chapman, I think. She's an archaeologist or anthropologist. That she were working with the last I think it was the last people of the Selknam, and she has some recordings. The dictionary, you can, I don't know if they still have copies, but if you go to Ushuaia, that has to be in your bucket list to go to Harberton Ranch, and I'm sure that they still have some of the dictionary from Thomas Bridges there. What else? Also, if you go to Navarino Island in Port of Williams, there is a museum there, the Martin Gusinde, and they have in the exhibition you can hear some of the recordings of that area. Actually, they like to sing a lot, so most of the recordings are from people singing.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So there's a question here about Darwin and whether he engaged with other indigenous groups as deeply as he seemed to engage with the people of Tierra del Fuego.
Well, as far as I know, also with the people of Fiji's island, he, in some of his notes, he compared Fuegians with the people of Fiji's. But he wasn't that descriptive with them as he was with the people of Tierra del Fuego. So that is why it's so important, because in this particular place, with these particular people, he started to have more ideas and inspiration for his evolution theory.
Mm-hmm. Do we know what happened to the little girl that he brought on board?
Yeah, well, she and York Minster, they were Alakaloofs. They were in the same tribe, so they were together. And when they were in this attempt of mission in Wulaya with Jemmy, the three of them were together, and actually they have a particular wigwam, a hut for them. So after this attempt failed, they invite Jemmy Bottom to go with their people to the Alakaloof people, and Jemmy went with them. But it was quite surprising when he realized that Fuegia Basket and York Minster stole all of his belongings, and left him with pretty much nothing. So he was very sad, and he went back to Bulaya, or that area, because it was his homeland. And there is pretty much no records after that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So someone's wondering if this trip, did Darwin go to Tierra del Fuego first or the Galapagos first?
Tierra del Fuego first, and then Galapagos.
And so final question I'll take today is, I'm going to combine a couple actually into one. How is climate change affecting the wildlife and people in this area? And are any of the species endangered?
Yeah, I will say that many of the marine mammal species in that area is endangered, and many of the penguin species in that area is endangered. There are many different factors, because the landscape has changed during the last years. We have introduced some animal species like beavers, like dogs. The dogs are predating penguins in some islands, so they are diminishing the populations of penguins. Also, we cannot discard entanglements, and we cannot say that in general the climate change and the temperature of the water is changing, and it's making all that big mass of ice start to melt. So of course there are many factors that are there in the middle, but it's something that we have to be very particular in each case, or in each species, to be more precise. But yes, there are many signs of climate change in that area.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, Lilia and Annie, thank you so much. This was a really fascinating story, and I know, well, maybe I just speak for myself, but it seems that Galapagos far overshadows this story. So I thank you so much for bringing it into our attention, and I know you've piqued a lot of interest based on the comments and questions I've been receiving here at the end. People want to know more about this, so thank you so much again for presenting. I'm going to hand it back over to both of you for any closing comments you'd like to make, and we'll start with Lilia.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and for letting me sharing one of my I don't know, my favorite topics in the world. I'm quite nerdy about Darwin and his work, and I was so excited to discover more and share it with you today. Thank you so much.
Well, Lilia, it is absolutely our treat that you are so nerdy about this, and I can't wait to find out what your other passions are that you can share with us, because this was absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all of you for tuning in. We would not be able to do this each day and each week without you joining us to learn. And remember, we do have a daily dose tomorrow, but we also have one next week on Patagonia. So if you want to learn more about this area, definitely tune in then. And thank you, Kendall, for all of your help.
Well, thanks again, ladies. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. And do join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose. You can find next week's lineup tomorrow on our website, including registration links. And we did record today's presentation, so we'll have a replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar.